In New York, it's important to keep your eyes up and walk with purpose, and that means you too, family of four from the Midwest. But this was especially important around the turn of the 20th century, when 10th and 11th Avenues were commonly referred to as Death Avenue.
Hey! I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
If we're going to get specific here, there have technically been 3 Death Avenues in New York over the course of history, with the first being a reference to Park Avenue, which had a street-level train that ran to Grand Central during the 19th century. But most famously, the term refers to 10th and 11th Avenues. In 1846, the city authorized the construction of a set of train tracks that ran down both avenues to a freight terminal at Beach and Hudson Streets, and finally ending at Chambers Street. These were street-level trains, many of them blocks long, so they constantly interfered with the daily traffic on the west side. In addition to making the morning commute a real hassle, the train tracks also had a pretty good chance of killing you, which led to the nickname Death Avenue. In 1892, the New York Globe reported on these accidents, saying, "Many had been sacrificed to a monster that menaced them night and day." We all have monsters that menace us night and day. For me, it's a guilty conscience and an unhealthy affinity for Paddington Bear, but a literal death train is as good a demon as any. A report by the Bureau of Municipal Research in 1908 claimed that in the previous half-century, over 436 people had died because of the train. Amongst these victims was a 7-year-old boy who, according to the New York Times, was, quote, ground to death, and whose accident caused a protest of over 500 school children. The previous Death Avenue train, located on Park Avenue, was removed largely in part of protests of the local residents, but it's important to remember that most of these protesters were wealthy, and most of the folks who lived near 10th and 11th Avenues were not. So naturally, the city took the side of the death train and claimed most reports about the dangers of the track were sensationalist and essentially gaslighted the locals whose children were literally being, quote, shockingly mangled. Even the railroad company offered to elevate the tracks in a deal with the city after a 5-year-old boy was decapitated by the train. The city thought the company was asking for too much in return, though, and declined the offer. One safety requirement that was put in place, however, was that a dude on a horse, referred to as a West Side cowboy, would ride out in front of the train with a big red flag and warn people that the train was coming. The further time passed into the 20th century, the fewer deaths there were for no real explicable reason. Finally, in 1929, an agreement was met to create an elevated track, now the public space known as the High Line. However, the final piece of track work was not removed from street level until 1941. Death Avenue is an interesting, albeit grim, look at New York's past. It's befuddling to look at a piece of history where tragedies seem to happen over and over and over again with no intervention from the people in power who had the ability to do something to stop it. But hey, maybe it's not so different from the way things are today, especially if you follow the money. Well, that's all I gotta say about that. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you liked it, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and tell me what things you'd like to hear more about in the comment section below. All right, have a good one.